There's a $10 million gap sitting in the middle of Chicago right now, and it's threatening to completely reshape the Bulls' future. Josh Giddey wants $30 million per year. The Bulls are offering $20. And according to the latest insider reports, this standoff is about to reach its breaking point before August ends. But here's what nobody's talking about. The numbers behind Giddey's demand are absolutely wild, and they might just prove he's worth every penny. The contract negotiations between Josh Giddey and the Chicago Bulls have turned into one of the most fascinating power plays of the NBA offseason. This isn't just about money, it's about a 22-year-old Australian point guard who believes he's proven himself worthy of elite-level money after one of the most dominant post-All-Star break runs in recent memory. The Bulls front office, meanwhile, is trying to balance the books while keeping their rising star happy, and the clock is ticking louder each day. What makes this situation even more explosive is the restricted free agency element. Giddey can't just walk away to another team as the Bulls hold all the cards, but that also means they're walking a tightrope between keeping their franchise cornerstone and not completely breaking the bank. And based on the latest reports from NBA insiders, that tightrope is getting thinner by the day. But here's where things get really interesting. The Bulls aren't just dealing with a typical contract negotiation. They're dealing with a player who completely transformed his game and his value in the span of just a few months. And the numbers from his post-All-Star break surge are so ridiculous, they're forcing front offices across the league to completely recalculate what Josh Giddey is actually worth. The standoff itself tells a story that goes way deeper than just dollars and cents. When Giddey was traded from Oklahoma City to Chicago, many saw it as the Bulls taking a flyer on a talented but inconsistent young player. But what happened after the All-Star break turned that narrative completely upside down. The Bulls didn't just get a solid contributor, they got a player who put up numbers that only Nikola Jokic matched across an entire season. According to the most recent insider reports, both sides are expected to reach a resolution by the end of August. The Bulls have reportedly stood firm on keeping any deal in the $20 million average annual value range, while Giddey's camp continues pushing for that $30 million number, but sources close to the situation suggest there's finally some movement happening behind the scenes, and it might involve a compromise that nobody saw coming. The fascinating part about this whole negotiation is what it reveals about how quickly a player's value can shift in today's NBA. 6 months ago, Josh Giddey was seen as a promising young player with upside. Today, he's demanding superstar money and backing it up with performance numbers that make front offices around the league take notice. But that transformation didn't happen overnight. It was triggered by one specific event that changed everything. Here's what really sparked Josh Giddey's demand for superstar money, and why the numbers back up his confidence. After the All-Star break, when Lavine was traded and Giddey was given the keys to Chicago's offense, something incredible happened. The young Australian didn't just step up, he completely exploded. We're talking about averaging 21.2 points, 10.7 rebounds, and 9.3 assists per game while shooting 50% from the field and an absolutely blistering 45.7% from three-point range. But here's the kicker that's driving his contract demands. Those numbers weren't just good, they were historically elite. According to multiple statistical analyses, only one player in the entire NBA matched Josh Giddey's post-All-Star break production across the full 2024-25 season. That player? Three-time MVP Nikola Jokic. When you're putting up Jokic-level numbers, even for a short stretch, $30 million per year starts looking a lot more reasonable. The transformation was so dramatic that it caught everyone off guard, including the Bulls' front office. In one 13-game stretch, Giddey recorded 7 double-doubles and 3 triple-doubles. He nearly posted a quadruple-double against the Lakers. He had the Bulls averaging over 121 points per game as a team during that span. This wasn't just a hot streak, this was a player announcing himself as a legitimate franchise centerpiece. And that's exactly what's making this contract negotiation so complicated for Chicago. They traded for Josh Giddey expecting to get a solid young player with potential. Instead, they got a player who demonstrated he could be the primary offensive engine for a team that was suddenly one of the most exciting in the league. But paying for that level of production means committing huge money to a player who's only shown that elite level for a few months. What's even more impressive about Giddey's post-All-Star surge is the context in which it happened. This wasn't him putting up numbers on a tanking team or in garbage time situations. The Bulls were fighting for playoff positioning. Every game mattered, and Giddey was carrying them through crucial moments. His performance in clutch situations, his leadership on a young team, and his ability to make everyone around him better first. Those are the intangibles that justify superstar money. But that performance surge also created unrealistic expectations, and that's where the current standoff gets really interesting. Because while Giddey proved he could play at an MVP level for a few months, the Bulls front office has to decide whether they believe that level of play is sustainable over the course of a full season and multiple years. And that's where the latest insider information completely changes the game. The breakthrough in these negotiations came from an unexpected source: NBA executives around the league who were surveyed about Josh Giddey's actual value. And their responses are giving both sides the reality check they needed. According to the survey results, most executives believe a 4-year, $100 million deal would be appropriate for Giddey, with the most optimistic suggesting 5 years and $125 million. That puts his value right in the middle of what both sides have been demanding. But here's what's really fascinating about those executive opinions. They're not just based on Giddey's post-All-Star explosion. They're factoring in his age, his trajectory, his skill set, and most importantly, his potential to continue improving. At 22 years old, Giddey isn't just getting paid for what he's already done, he's getting paid for what NBA executives believe he can become over the next 5 years. The survey also revealed something crucial about how the league views restricted free agency in today's market. With most teams lacking significant cap space, there's very little external pressure on the Bulls to overpay. Unlike unrestricted free agency, where teams might bid against each other and drive up prices, the Bulls essentially have a monopoly on Giddey's services. That gives them leverage in negotiations, but it also means they risk damaging the relationship if they lowball their own player. What's becoming clear from these executive opinions is that both sides might need to compromise. The Bulls might need to come up from $20 million per year, and Giddey might need to come down from $30 million. But the magic number that's emerging from these conversations is somewhere around $25 million annually, exactly what those executive surveys suggested. And that brings us to the most important factor in this entire negotiation, something that completely changed Josh Giddey's mindset and confidence level. The Zach Lavine trade wasn't just about moving salary or acquiring assets. For Josh Giddey, it represented the moment when the Chicago Bulls officially handed him the keys to their franchise, and his performance after that trade showed he was ready to drive. Before the Lavine trade, Giddey was still finding his role in Chicago's offense. He was putting up solid numbers, but he was clearly the secondary playmaker behind an established star. But when Lavine was moved, everything shifted. Suddenly, Giddey wasn't just a complementary player, he was the focal point of the entire offensive system. And the way he embraced that responsibility is exactly why he's now demanding superstar money. The psychological impact of that trade can't be understated. For a young player, knowing that your organization believes in you enough to build around you changes everything. It changes how you approach games, how you prepare, how you interact with teammates, and most importantly, how you value yourself in contract negotiations. Giddey went from being a promising young player to being the unquestioned leader of Chicago's offense, and his play reflected that shift in responsibility. But the Lavine trade also created pressure that Giddey had never experienced before. In Oklahoma City, he was developing alongside other young players with minimal expectations. In Chicago, with Lavine still on the roster, he was a complementary piece. But after the trade, every game, every possession, every decision was being evaluated through the lens of whether Josh Giddey could be a franchise player, and his response to that pressure is what's driving his current contract demands. The numbers tell the story perfectly. Before the Lavine trade, Giddey was averaging solid but unspectacular numbers. After the trade, he became one of the most productive players in the entire league. But beyond the statistics, there was something different about his demeanor, his confidence, his willingness to take over games in crucial moments. He wasn't just filling Lavine's statistical production, he was filling his leadership role. And that's exactly what the Bulls front office is grappling with now. They didn't just lose a scorer when they traded Lavine, they discovered they had a legitimate franchise cornerstone in Josh Giddey. But paying him like a franchise cornerstone means committing serious money to a player who's still relatively unproven over a full season. It's a calculated risk that could define Chicago's next 5 years. Here's the reality that's making this negotiation even more complex. Josh Giddey literally cannot leave Chicago, even if he wanted to. As a restricted free agent, the Bulls have the right to match any offer sheet he signs with another team. And with the current salary cap situation around the league, very few teams have the space to make a competitive offer anyway. That should give Chicago all the leverage, but it's actually creating a different kind of pressure. When a player can't leave, the relationship between team and player becomes even more important. The Bulls can't just lowball Giddey and expect him to be happy about it, because he's stuck in Chicago whether he likes his contract or not. That means they need to find a number that makes him genuinely excited about his future with the organization, not just grudgingly accepting of it. The lack of external competition also means that this negotiation is really about internal evaluation rather than market forces. The Bulls aren't bidding against other teams, they're bidding against their own assessment of what Josh Giddey is worth to their organization. And that's a much more complex calculation than simply matching the highest offer from a competitor. But here's where the restricted free agency rules are actually working in Giddey's favor. Because other teams can't realistically pursue him, there's less pressure on the Bulls to make a quick decision. That gives both sides time to find a compromise that works for everyone. And according to the latest insider reports, that time is finally being put to good use. The other factor working in Giddey's favor is the Bulls' own salary cap situation. Chicago isn't in a position where they need to pinch pennies to stay under the luxury tax. They have the financial flexibility to pay Giddey what he's worth, which means this negotiation is really about determining his actual value rather than finding ways to cut costs. That should make reaching a fair deal much easier. And that's where the latest insider information provides the most hope for both sides. According to multiple reports, a compromise is finally taking shape, and it looks exactly like what those NBA executives predicted. The solution that's emerging from these contract talks is exactly what you'd expect from a negotiation between two reasonable parties who both want the same outcome. According to NBA insider Chris Siegel, Josh Giddey and the Chicago Bulls are expected to reach a resolution by the end of August, likely on a 3-year deal that splits the difference between their original positions. Here's how the compromise is reportedly taking shape. The Bulls might move up slightly from their $20 million per year offer, while Giddey comes down from his $30 million demand. The 3-year structure is particularly interesting because it benefits both sides in different ways. For the Bulls, it means they're not locked into superstar money for 5 or 6 years based on a few months of elite play. They get to see if Giddey can sustain his post-All-Star break production over multiple full seasons before committing to a longer-term max deal. For Giddey, it means he gets fairly paid for his current level of play while also positioning himself for an even bigger payday when he's 25 or 26. But the most encouraging part of these reports is that both sides seem genuinely motivated to get a deal done. This isn't a contentious negotiation where one side is trying to squeeze every dollar out of the other. It's two parties who recognize they need each other and are working toward a solution that makes everyone happy. That kind of collaborative approach usually leads to contracts that age well for both sides. The timing of this resolution is also perfect for both parties. Getting it done by the end of August gives Giddey time to focus entirely on preparing for the upcoming season without contract distractions. It gives the Bulls clarity about their salary cap situation as they make other roster moves. And it avoids the awkwardness of starting training camp with their most important young player still unsigned. What's also working in favor of a quick resolution is that both sides have seen enough. The Bulls have seen Giddey perform at an elite level when given full responsibility. Giddey has seen that the Bulls are willing to build their offense around him and give him the freedom to be a primary playmaker. Neither side needs more information. They just need to agree on the financial terms. And based on the latest reporting, those financial terms are getting closer to alignment every day. The gap between $20 million and $30 million per year seemed insurmountable a few months ago, but when you're talking about $22 to $25 million annually, that's a much more manageable difference to split. This contract resolution will have massive implications that extend far beyond just Josh Giddey's bank account. For the Chicago Bulls, signing Giddey to a fair long-term deal officially announces their commitment to building around young talent rather than chasing expensive veteran stars. It signals to the rest of the league that Chicago believes they have found their franchise cornerstone and they're willing to invest in his development rather than trade him for immediate help. For Josh Giddey personally, this contract represents validation of his belief that he can be a primary option on a competitive NBA team. Getting paid like a star player comes with star player expectations, and how he responds to those expectations over the next 3 years will determine whether his next contract is a supermax deal or a more modest extension. The pressure is about to increase exponentially. But the broader implications for the NBA are just as interesting. Giddey's contract will set a precedent for how teams value young players who show flashes of elite production. It will influence negotiations for players like him who break out later in their rookie contracts. And it will demonstrate whether teams are willing to pay for potential rather than just proven production over multiple seasons. The most fascinating aspect of this entire situation is what it reveals about player development in the modern NBA. Josh Giddey's transformation from promising prospect to franchise cornerstone happened incredibly quickly, but it required the perfect storm of opportunity, confidence, and organizational support. His post-All-Star break explosion wasn't just about individual talent, it was about being put in the right situation to showcase that talent. That has huge implications for how teams evaluate young players and how they structure their development programs. The Bulls didn't just acquire a good player when they traded for Giddey, they acquired a player who was ready to take the next step as soon as he was given the opportunity. Recognizing that readiness and providing that opportunity is what separates successful franchises from mediocre ones. And now, as this contract saga reaches its conclusion, both Josh Giddey and the Chicago Bulls are betting that lightning can strike twice. They're betting that the post-All-Star break version of Giddey is the real version, not just a hot streak.